program will begin in just a few moments. Please take your seats. Our program will begin in just a few moments. Please take your seats. Please welcome Seema Wadwa, Executive Director, Environmental Stewardship, Kaiser Permanente.
Good Good morning and welcome to all of our viewers joining us online and to everybody who's here with us in DC. We are delighted to have you and to explore together the vital intersection between climate change and health. It is an honor to see so many passionate individuals committed to creating a healthier and more sustainable future. Throughout the day, we have an exciting agenda, and we have curated a diverse range of speakers, experts, and thought leaders who will share their insights and experiences. From national thought leaders to Gen Z environmental justice activists and leading community voices and Fortune 100 leaders, we will explore strategies to put health at the center of climate action. It is my great pleasure to welcome Andy Moose, Head of Health and Wellness at the World Economic Forum, and our co-host for this series to the stage. At the forum, Andy is responsible for this collaborative development of strategies to advance preventative health and well-being through the Center of Health and Healthcare. His current focus is on initiatives related to nutrition, personalized well-being, and workforce health. Thank you so much, and welcome, Andy.
Seema, and thank you to those that are joining here live in Washington, D.C. and also virtually. On behalf of the World Economic Forum and Kaiser Permanente, I'd like to welcome you to this launch of the Connecting Climate Change and Health series. And as Seema mentioned, the goal of this series is really to elevate critical topics such as declining air quality, extreme heat and weather-related events, and their impacts on individual and community health and health equity. Today, we have an exciting group and sessions, and we hope that this is just the start of a much broader conversation and a deeper level of engagement and partnership across multiple levels. Really, at a corporate business leader level, we want to see health really become front and center and combined with many of the climate action plans that have been evolving over recent years. We also want to see greater awareness in terms of the clinical environment around the awareness of these challenges, the health-related issues, and how to develop a more resilient health system to better prepare for what lies ahead. And then lastly, we want to share insights and ideas about how to engage in our communities and bring forward this focus on preserving individual and community health in a way that resonates and also is able to navigate some of the political and dialogue challenges that we often have at that level. As the International Organization for Public-Private Cooperation, for those of you that are not familiar with the World Economic Forum, our purpose is to bring together stakeholders from all sectors of society to shape a better future. Our belief is that no single entity can improve the state of the world on its own. With that in mind, we work closely with our partners like Kaiser Permanente and others to bring together diverse leaders like yourselves from across nations and the globe to really share knowledge, insights, and to inform decision-making and strategies, and lastly, to drive collective action for positive change. Our aim for this event is to drive greater awareness and encourage business leaders across all industries to work together with governments and your communities to prioritize health and health equity as a central part of climate action planning. Why is this moment the right time to highlight this critical connection between human and planetary health? As I drove down Constitution Avenue today, it was difficult to see the monuments amongst the air pollution caused by over 160 wildfires in Quebec. We have 17 U.S. states that have issued air quality alerts as a result of this, and so climate change is not just a concept, but something that is squarely here in our backyard and has affected many of us with pre-existing conditions or allergies, and also in particular children and the elderly. As of yesterday, New York City had the worst air quality of any city in the world, particularly impacting those that I just mentioned. 2 weeks ago at the World Health Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland, the World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros, stated that the most pressing reasons for urgent climate action are the impacts not in the future, but right now on health. The climate crisis is a health crisis, fueling outbreaks, contributing to higher rates of non-communicable disease, and threatening to overwhelm our health workforce and our health infrastructure. The World Health Organization has in fact called climate change the single biggest threat to global public health. The latest report from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, suggests that we are currently on a path towards an increase of 2.7 degrees Celsius by 2100. Nearly 60% of scientists believe that it could be closer to an increase of 3 to 4 degrees by 2100. The consequences of this increase would likely include significant shifts in the disease landscape, health systems coming under immense pressures as incidents of vector-borne diseases, climate-related cardiovascular diseases, and respiratory tract infections dramatically increase. A rise in malnutrition, droughts, wildfires, floods, threatening agricultural production and creating risks of food shortage, increased nutrient deficiency, and malnutrition, in particular in developing countries. A loss of productivity, 45 billion labor hours were lost in 2018 due to higher temperatures. The potential for financial market instability with climate-related disruptions in supply chains, infrastructure, and food security threatening financial markets, and limiting access to capital that's much needed to grow new technologies to combat climate change. Migration displacement with projections of over 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050, loss of economic livelihoods, increasing conflicts, rise in civil unrest, we could go on. In the face of these projections, it's easy to get caught up in the gloom and doom of these projections. The danger of giving into that temptation is really the temptation for apathy and inaction. There is another path that allows for potentially upward cycles of cascading benefits, and there is indeed signs of positive progress. At the forum, in partnership with a number of organizations, we've committed to working together to limit global climate temperature rise and also to work together to avoid some of these impacts. We currently have over 30 major initiatives across multiple centers with over 600 partners focused on accelerating climate action towards net zero, resource circularity, regenerating food, ocean, and water systems, as well as a focus on nature positivity. What has been absent from many of those conversations, however, has been a focus on health. While it is often mentioned, it is rarely at the center of these conversations. That is slowly beginning to change. Our collective belief is that the pathway to sustainability is indeed through human health. By putting human health at the center rather than on the side, we can increase the level of societal engagement, building momentum toward policy changes, and driving more holistic and impactful solutions. That's why at the forum's most recent annual meeting in Davos, we announced the launch of a new Climate and Health Initiative. The objective of this initiative is to facilitate engagements across partners to enhance advocacy and visibility to health impacts of climate change, gather research and data across relevant sectors and industries, and explore in depth the mitigation and preparedness measures that we need to take both in the short, medium, and long term. Our goal is to highlight and address the gap in the climate and health landscape, leverage our partners' vast global and multi-stakeholder networks, and ensure streamlined pathways to improving overall actions and strengthening of climate plans. We'd also see that there is an emerging landscape of opportunity. In fact, by some estimates, the solutions to combat climate change represent more than 75 trillion in business opportunity in the coming years. We're seeing these examples of new business models emerging that have the power to decarbonize not just value chains and industries, but actually leveraging emerging technologies to better predict and model the emergence of new pathogens, to reinvent business models within healthcare and in community health engagement, and actually realize the full potential to improve soil health and increase nutrient density of foods. However, that will require a great deal of courage. It will require new sources of funding, and it will require new policies and new incentives and structures. That's why we're here today, to come together and share these insights and ideas and build not just a community to support this dialogue series, but a community to support collective action. I want to thank Kaiser Permanente for their nearly 20 years of partnership with the forum, and specifically for the leadership of Greg Adams, Dr. Bashar Shukar, and all the team at Kaiser that's working with us to help shape and drive this critical agenda forward. And I would just like to close my comments with A new and positive development from the CEO of the upcoming climate conference this October, and this is the convening group. It's called COP28 of the nation states coming together to discuss the results of the Paris Agreement. The new CEO, Anand Amin, announced that there will be a full day dedicated to health, and it will be an integral part of the agenda. That's a step forward. There were a few conversations last year. We're now seeing the full day. We can see that trajectory moving towards health becoming much more of a central part of this discussion, which is why we need to come together as leaders today and discuss what those opportunities are and how we best prepare ourselves and our organizations to contribute to this agenda. So I want to thank you again for joining us today, and as we come together to bridge and strengthen the connections between climate and health. Seema, back to you.
Andy, thank you so much for setting a tone of collaboration and of action and ending with powerful hope on connecting the important links between climate and health. It is now my great honor to introduce Greg Adams, who will be joining us virtually. Greg Adams is a chair and chief executive officer of Kaiser Permanente. He is a nationally recognized leader and a champion of healthcare transformation, improving access and advocating for better health outcomes. Greg has over 30 years of leadership experience as a senior health care executive and has played an integral role in leading the transformation and improvement of patient care outcomes at Kaiser Permanente. In addition, he has been a key leader in driving Kaiser Permanente's mission of providing high-quality care and coverage for its members. I'll turn it over now to Greg.
Good morning. Thank you. It's great to be speaking to all of you today. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but I'm just pleased to be a part of this very important conversation. We're here to have an important conversation on climate change, its impact, and why we must work collectively to address this growing crisis. I remember being kind of young and years ago talking about the impact of climate change, and it seemed as if it was something so far away. It was something for our grandchildren's children to talk about, not something that I felt close to or in my lifetime that I would even see the impact of. But the impact is here. It's now, and it's urgent. Climate change is disrupting lives, damaging businesses and business operations, and having a very real and dramatic impact on the health of our communities. 90% of heat waves, droughts, typhoons, and hurricanes causing mass destruction around the world are now classified as weather and climate related, and are costing the world economy $520 billion annually. The effects of climate change will increase competition for resources such as land, water, and food. The World Bank estimates that more than 150 million people in parts of Africa, Latin America, and South Asia will be forced to migrate by 2050. Climate change will continue to limit the availability and quality of drinking water and water for agriculture. Crops that have thrived for centuries are now struggling to survive, impacting the poor and the most vulnerable, which will make economic output between the world's richest and the world's poorest countries grow even wider. Between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause 250 additional deaths per year from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. The World Health Organization has declared climate change to be the single biggest threat to human health on the planet. The single biggest threat to human health on the planet, with increasing impacts including air pollution, extreme heat, smoke exposure, and flooding. It is expected that these threats will intensify and new threats will continue to emerge. Climate change also causes mental health problems, from stress and anxiety to chronic and severe mental health disorders. Kaiser Permanente has been and has seen the direct impact of climate health changes in our communities, on our patients, and on our workforce. As we've had to evacuate our hospitals due to wildfires, as we've had to treat increasingly health conditions exacerbated by climate change, and as we are having and have had to manage the financial consequences of climate-related impacts on our operations, our facilities, and our supply chain. So with the healthcare industry on the front line, our leaders truly have an opportunity to take and to play a leadership role. The healthcare sector has stepped up in some important ways to collaborate and champion initiatives that allow us to work together toward common goals. By pushing the climate change conversation to the center and addressing the impacts that hit close to home, we have more influence by providing objective facts. If we focus on the far-reaching consequences of climate change, such as ice shelves, temperature rise, and polar bears, it's easier to ignore and deny that climate change is a crisis that must be addressed immediately. We also know that climate change impacts are not felt equally. Climate change disproportionately impacts the poor, people of color, and the least advantaged. Research of cities across the US found that urban heat islands, areas where parts of cities can be up to 20 degrees warmer than other parts of the city, directly correlate to the historically redlined communities. The reality is that people whose health is being harmed the most by climate crisis are the people who contribute least to its cause, and people who aren't able to protect themselves and their families against it. Environmental stewardship has always been a part of Kaiser Permanente's operations. Our work to protect against the climate change is embedded in our mission and our operations, and how we manage our buildings, purchase our food, purchase medical supplies and equipment, how we serve our members, and how we consume energy and process waste. But if we are going to solve the climate change crisis and prioritize health equity, we need collective action. No single organization, business, or sector can solve this alone. That is why Kaiser Permanente is partnering with leading business organizations to raise awareness about the impacts of climate change on health and health equity. Because we have a unique opportunity to change because they have the ability to, businesses have a unique opportunity to drive change because they have the ability to leverage their capital, limit their own carbon footprint, and amplify powerful voices. But as a part of our work to mitigate the impacts of climate change, we're announcing our partnership with Business for Social Responsibility, or BRS, to work with businesses and the unique opportunity they have to drive change. Together with BSR, we're launching a new cross-sector collaborative initiative to help bring together companies and community stakeholders to address the growing problems of climate change and health equity. Through this initiative, we will encourage more climate action that centers on health, health equity, and climate justice. We hope our example will inspire others in the healthcare industry and beyond to take similar bold actions to mitigate their contributions to climate change. We have a great deal of work ahead of us, but by working together, we can help change the narrative and the outcomes for climate, health, and health equity. The time for us to act collectively and to own our future is now. Thank you again for being with us today and for being a part of this very important conversation. I know that you will find the rest of today engaging and informative. Thank you.
Heartfelt thank you to Greg for sharing those inspirational thoughts with us. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our next distinguished speaker, John Vu. John Vu is the National Vice President of Strategy for Community Health at Kaiser Permanente. John is responsible for the development and implementation of key strategies to ensure Kaiser Permanente's commitment to improving the health of communities focused on upstream determinants of health is honored. John has been with Kaiser Permanente for over 20 years, having previously been a director in national strategic planning. Thank you, John.
Hello, and thank you. I want to extend the welcome that our previous speakers have already extended to you all. Thank you for everyone in the room. We've got a packed room here, and I think we've got thousands online, so this is quite a momentous day for us. And I'm actually not the featured speaker here. I get to introduce and welcome up an interesting chat here. You've heard Andy from the World Economic Forum and Greg just now, our CEO, lay out all the issues and lay out all the pillars of this crisis that we have to face. And there are many players, and you're going to hear from all of them today, from community to businesses, but a central voice that needs to also play a big role in this is government and the role of policy in this. So it is my honor to welcome up from the federal government today, Candace Valsing, who works on climate and has a lot of illustrious titles and experiences from her background, but currently I think she's transitioning to the White House Office of Management and Budget. So welcome, Candace. Thank you. So Candace, let's start off. I think you've heard all the issues laid out earlier, but maybe start a little bit with your experience and all the vast experience that I referenced. And I think in particular, you've made a strong connection between the economic impacts and the risks impacts from climate change. So you want to talk a little bit about your past work in this area and how you make that connection?
Happy to. And thank you all for inviting me here today. Very, very gracious and generous to be here. So I actually started my career probably about 20 years ago on a day like today. I was studying in Kampala, Uganda, and there was a lot of air pollution outside. And it was study abroad. We were learning about environmental management. And outside of the university we were studying at, there was waste burning, literally coming in the windows as we were learning about environmental management. And it was then that it just clicked for me that this is something there was an opportunity to help fix, that there was an interesting, was it a lack of information problem, or was it just there were no other options. And so, coming here this morning and feeling the air pollution, breathing the air pollution that I did 20 years ago, literally in this time, is really what spurred me into this. And it was the health side of it that got me interested. I went on to go to Berkeley and get a degree in public health, environmental health sciences, and then have transitioned to look more into the economic sides of climate change. But it was really health that brought me here to this issue, and because it is really the center of, as you've heard from the speakers today, of the impacts and how the lives of everyday Americans interact with climate change is really by health, and in particular around equity. But you asked about economics in particular. So yes, I work at the Office of Management and Budget. For those of you who don't know, we do a lot of we're kind of like the nerds in the White House. We do a lot of the analyses. We do the budget, obviously. We crunch a lot of numbers. And so for the first time ever in our FY22 budget, so nearly or more than 2 years ago now, we did an analysis that estimated the fiscal cost of climate change on taxpayers. And we found that up to $2 trillion of lost revenue by the end of the century would happen due to climate change. And that is obviously very impactful. When we looked at the actual expenditure versus the revenue side of it, we found that up to $128 billion of additional expenditure would need to happen. I think everyone has probably heard about the dynamic in DC with the debt limit, and we obviously want to make sure that we are conserving our fiscal dollars and ensuring we're helping taxpayers protect the funding that they need. But underneath that 128 billion, it was 22 billion that was due to additional spending for Medicare and Medicaid due to the health impacts of climate change. And that's meaningful. That's a meaningful chunk of change, which I'm sure, that's just the federal government's cost. That there's an additional cost to obviously the people who are undergoing the health impacts. And then, similar to all of you and, from the companies around the country, you guys are also helping, this impacts your bottom line as well. So, I mean, that's a lot about, sorry for the long answer, that's a lot about the cost, and we've heard a lot about the cost of climate change, but I also just wanted to spend a minute here in the beginning talking about the opportunity. So I said earlier that we found that there was about a $2 trillion impact in lost revenue by the end of the century. We did another analysis last summer at OMB, and we found that if you look at the social cost or the social benefit of climate change, you will find that the Inflation Reduction Act, which is one of our largest landmark pieces of legislation that we've secured to try to help the problem, you will save up to $2 trillion by the middle of the century. And so that just shows the counterweight about the massive opportunity that there also is to address climate change and the benefits. So the social cost of carbon includes the implicit health benefits of addressing climate change. So I know that's a nerdy beginning here, but it just shows, an example of how when you do the numbers, when you do the math, the costs are massive, but the opportunities are even greater.
Yeah. Well, let's just stay on that nerdy front for a second longer here, because it's interesting you've been able to frame this climate change, which is sort of like this ethereal thing up there, connected to hardcore numbers and real impact. As you think about the health impacts, and you talked about the impacts of Medicare and Medicaid, but are there more ways to incorporate health-related impacts so that we could really see that? Is that a possibility to model that, especially at the highest national level?
Yeah, so we've started doing that. Obviously, there's always additional work to do, but we started doing that in our in the analysis that we did for OMB, and that's a start. Obviously, there are that analysis, for example, did not include deaths from premature mortality due to PM 2.5, which for those of you who follow air pollution, PM 2.5 is one of the largest causers of premature mortality. And so while the 22 billion was a massive impact, there's obviously still a lot more work to do to try to ingrain the larger impacts that we are seeing, which the modeling hasn't yet caught up to where we are yet. So that's not a reason to not do it, right? We should still continue to push the ball and move on modeling and really figure out how to ingrain health into our analysis of climate change, but there's a lot more work to do, and that's something we are focused on at OMB.
Great, okay. Yeah. Well, let's move off the spreadsheets for a little bit here. And you've had time at legislative levels, executive branch levels, at state levels, and you've seen probably a lot of innovations and technologies. Can you talk a little bit about what you might be seeing out there that gives us a little bit of the future look into solutions here that may start mitigating some of these issues?
Sure. I think the thing in front of mine is just what everyone's probably looking at today, which is your air quality alert. So that shows us, that's been around for decades through EPA and the state of California as well. But something we did last summer in the Biden administration is we have one for air quality, but we didn't have an alert for heat waves. So and heat waves are one of the largest causes of death in terms of climate change outcomes. And so we launched through NOAA, launched an alert system. So you could really understand when heat waves are coming and identify where you could go. I think we're gonna, one of the things we want to touch on was equity. And we all know that if you can't afford an air conditioning or you can't afford to get transportation to a cooling center, you're obviously a lot more vulnerable to heat waves. And so having apps and warning systems that will help you get in front of that is something that we focused on. We focused on in the administration. We've also focused on just literally providing more funding for air quality monitoring in general. So we're all experiencing the wildfire smoke this morning. one of the things we've requested in our budget is additional funding to monitor and measure air quality from wildfires, because the way that it moves is a little bit different, and there's great work that's been done in the state of California because they're unfortunately very familiar with wildfires, but that's not true for the rest of the country. So that's one of the things we're pushing for additional funding for in our budget.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you've mentioned equity. Greg made an impactful plea around the disproportionate impacts that these are going to have on vulnerable populations, especially those who did not contribute to creating some of these impacts. As you think about policy, as you think about analysis, as you think about the role of government, how do we ensure more inclusive policies that way? And you referenced a couple of ways, but can you speak a little bit more about how to continuously center health and health equity in that way?
Absolutely. So the way that we've done that, the forefront of it for us in the Biden-Harris administration has really been through an initiative called Justice 40. How many people are familiar with Justice 40? Raise your hand if you are. Okay, that's good.
Good smattering of hands.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So Justice 40 is a commitment that the president made on the campaign when he was actually the only president that's had a platform that had environmental justice at the center of it. That was a primary candidate. And in that, he committed to target 40% of the benefits of climate and clean energy investments towards disadvantaged communities. That is very important, and it's built off of work that was done in California, in New York. And the first day, or first week of the administration, we actually issued an executive order. He called on us at OMB and CEQ and the Climate Office to work together on that. And it has been one of the greatest parts of my work at OMB. It's obviously very challenging to do something like that, to fully integrate equity into all climate and clean energy spending. What we had to do was we actually had to go program by program across the entire federal government and identify which programs would be part of this initiative. There are 470 programs now across the federal government who are actively working to ensure that the climate and clean energy investments that they're making are flowing, the benefits of those investments are flowing to disadvantaged communities. And that is a massive, massive undertaking, which we really needed the whole of government and the whole of OMB to do. And so one way that we are able to do that is not only through requiring each agency to do a community engagement plan with environmental justice communities and to really bring them into the conversation, but going back to being nerdy here again, every funding announcement. So when there's a funding for hydrogen hubs or funding for new national labs or for solar projects, every funding opportunity comes through OMB. So, and the ones for climate and clean energy come across my desk. And I make sure that no funding opportunity leaves my desk unless there is an opportunity in there to maximize investments towards disadvantaged communities in line with Justice 40. And so one of the ways that we have done that, just because I'm saying this because I think it might be helpful as you guys are thinking about how to integrate equity into your own balance sheets, is as we're providing funding opportunities, we provide extra scoring or provide a higher priority to projects that are in disadvantaged communities and environmental justice communities. And so that's a way to ensure that part of the investments that we are making are going to benefit environmental justice communities. We've done a ton more, but that's the largest initiative that really spans the entire government. And like I said, 470 programs, and we have a whole map that you can find on our website, which identifies which communities are disadvantaged, so that we're really making sure we're targeting the right communities.
Yeah, that's just brilliant, and it's so heartening. I mean, I think it's one thing to declare a commitment to equity, but to systematize it the way you have and the administration has just seems really smart in many ways. We've got a couple minutes left, and maybe you reference, I think that's our new mantra for today, integrating equity into the balance sheet. Let's shift a little bit to businesses and ideas or thoughts that you've got, this public-private thing, but really the role of the private sector to play more of a role in health and equity.
Yeah, so I think a few things, maybe three. So one, integrating climate and health equity into your balance sheets, like I said. And I'm glad you're taking that away because it's been a big thing that we've learned at OMB that really helps move the ball and make a real impact in communities. So, to the extent that, you guys are thinking about your own balance sheets and how to both, as I started with in the beginning, to minimize the costs, whether it's healthcare expenditure costs or to increase the benefits. So, whether that's like saving money on energy efficient buildings or things like that, there's always a way to both be getting at the costs and the benefits of climate change when you're looking at your balance sheets. So that's, I think, the first thing I'd say. And then also supply chains. So it was mentioned a little bit indirectly here, but one of the things that we know we can do across both the federal government and businesses is to look at how we're spending our money, not just in terms of impacts and benefits, but also in terms of what are we buying when people say, like, show me your budget, it'll show you your priorities. How are we making sure that whether it's hospitals and it's equipment that has low HFCs, or other types of industries where you're really looking at where the goods and services that you're buying, what's underlying them in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but also in terms of climate resilience. When you're looking at your assets and doing asset management, is the building that you're going to purchase in a flood zone? How is that going to impact your balance sheet in the future? Tying back to balance sheets. So, and then the third thing I would say is, well, before I say that, so and an example of that, if you're looking for it, is each agency in the federal government, so the Environmental Protection Agency, HHS, they have to do their own assessment of this. They have to do what is a climate adaptation plan, and so they have to struggle through some of these questions. And so if you're looking for a good resource to look to in terms of how in the federal government we're answering these questions of how to both reduce risk and maximize opportunities, there's climate adaptation plans that are online that you can look at as a resource. But then lastly, I think, just more of what you're doing today and the great announcement that was provided, which is talking to people. You guys are the most influential businesses in the country, if not the world. Hearing you guys talk about climate change and health equity, using your microphone to talk about, like I said, both the impacts and the opportunities, that's extremely powerful, and it was very heartening to hear about the announcement that you had today.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for that special message to businesses. I know we've got a broader audience and we're out of time, but can you end on one message of hope? Like, what are you seeing out there that gives you hope that we can work our way through this, that we can collectively take action and work towards those goals that have been laid out? Yeah,
thank you. So I will steal a line from Ali Zaidi, who's potentially going to come here, but it got pulled into other things. And so what he often says is, one of the things in the Inflation Reduction Act, the bill that I said in the beginning, that I mentioned in the beginning, is there's a program for, and actually in the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's funding for school buses. And as part of that, that funding, we've been able to completely transform the types of school buses that everyone's kids will be brought to school on. They used to be dirty, diesel polluting buses that we knew caused health impacts and also contributed to climate change. And now they'll be cleaner electric buses. And so I think what he often says, although I'm gonna probably get it wrong, or not do it as well, but is that now kids, when the school bus drives up to pick them up from school, they know that they're valued because there's not a dirty polluting bus that's picking them up. There's a clean bus and America is investing in them and their health. And so I think that's really inspiring.
That's very powerful. Thank you. Well, thank you, Candace, for all your great work. Keep it up, and thank you for being a beacon of hope at such a high level for us in this country. Next, we have a powerhouse lineup discussion coming up here, and I'm just pleased to introduce the woman who's going to lead and moderate that discussion. She is Ruth Williams-Brinkley, and she is the regional president for our Mid-Atlantic state regions here. We're on our home turf here in DC, and she has been a powerful leader here at Kaiser Permanente and before that as well. And I've seen her in action working on issues as varied as housing and homelessness and all the way to this climate issue, in addition to being an incredible business leader. So welcome Ruth to the stage. Thank you, Ruth.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. John has already introduced me, so I am not going to go about further introductions. What I would like to say is that I am from a small area in Georgia, rural area. I'm a nurse by training, and I've worked in a lot of places, but I want to save my information for the two women who are coming to join me on the stage. We are going to unpack this topic. We're going to discuss with this panel climate change and natural disasters and how it impacts our communities on a personal level. So let me introduce our panelists, and I'd ask them to come up as I introduce them. First, I am going to start with Dr. Regina Benjamin. And neither of these ladies, I would say, need a lot of introduction. But Dr. Benjamin served as the 18th Surgeon General of the United States from 2009 to 2013. She's the founder and CEO of Bayou La Batre Clinic and Gulf States Health Policy Center, and she is the NOLA.com Times-Picayune Endowed Chair of Public Health Science at Xavier University of Louisiana. I think I got all those pronunciations out correctly. She joined the board of Kaiser Permanente Health Plan and Hospitals in June of 2015, and she's a member of the Quality and Health Improvement Committee. And we're just delighted to have her as a part of Kaiser and a part of this session today. So Dr. Benjamin, thank you so much for being here. Thanks. And then our second panelist, Dr. Ivor Horn, also needs no introduction. She is Chief Health and Equity Officer at Google, where she leads a cross-functional team that provides health equity leadership to ensure that health-related products, research, and other initiatives are diverse, fair, accessible, and inclusive. She's a pediatrician and health services researcher with over 25 years of experience in health equity. And prior to her role at Google, Dr. Horn served as Chief Medical Officer at Accolade. And so I want to welcome Dr. Horn. Well, we are getting ready to engage in a great conversation, I think. We had some wonderful comments by Andy, by Greg, by Candace, and they gave us a lot of things to think about. So what I want to do is just go down on the ground now, how this impacts us in our daily lives, and sort of how do we make sure that we do things on a day-to-day basis that help us. So Dr. Benjamin, I'm going to start with you. Going back to the roots of where you started, you completed your residency and then built a clinic. And every time I read about that, I've known this story, and I've known Dr. Benjamin for a long time. I know this story, but I am always impressed that you built a clinic, started it yourself, in a small fishing village in Bayou La Batre, Alabama. This clinic was devastated by climate events more than once, including Hurricane Georges in 1998, Hurricane Katrina in 2005. You know, first of all, that must have been devastating to have that happen. But what I want to ask you is, how did that impact your understanding, your personal understanding of the relationship between climate change and health? Because you were personally impacted, your patients were personally impacted.
Very much so, but just to go back even further, I went there, but I grew up there too. I didn't grow up in Bayou La Batre. I grew up across the bay, the Mobile Bay. And so growing up, we understood climate. I grew up with hurricanes. I grew up learning direction, watching the sky to make, we'd look at, see if a squall was coming up or whether or not the tide was changing. We also knew it would get hot in the summers, and during the dog days of summer, it was a little storm, 3 o'clock in the afternoon to cool it off. And so the whole area is really understanding that the environment made a difference. Even today, everyone has an app to tell you what the weather is, and we check the weather every day. So it's something we already knew. When I first started the clinic, I was the only doctor in the town for 22 years, but I would ask patients, when's your last tetanus shot? And they say, oh, during Hurricane Frederick, and then I had one during Hurricane such and such. Everything was related to some disaster. Yeah. And so it's part of the thought process. What the challenge is, though, is that when people say, well, there's global warming, well, it's always been hot, so what? You have hurricanes, so what? and you're being told that climate change doesn't exist or global warming doesn't exist. And so that's the challenge we have. But you have people who understand that these are related, and they can see that we're having storms, even though we're not having more storms, they're more intense, and the durations are longer. And a 100-year storm is happening sometimes two in the same year. So common sense tells you something's happening.
Has changed.
I've got people who will say, well, you know, after a certain storm, we don't have dogwood trees anymore. Where are they? Because they had a fungus after the storm, and a few years later, they're gone. So the common sense is there. It's up to us to teach them a way to understand it, as well as talking their language. You know, my patients don't understand carbonization.
Right.
But they do understand that something's changing. So find a language that people understand, and that's our job, I think.
Right. Wow, that's just amazing. And that really is on the ground where it happens. Dr. Horn, so tell us about climate change and the impact it's had on your business at Google or wherever you want to concentrate, because I think it's a different approach, you know, and many similarities to what was just said. So share with us what you found.
Yeah, no, I'll pick up a little bit on the on sort of the narrative and the story of climate change, because I think it is really important, because we think about it from the work that we do, but we also think about it for the people that we impact and the people that we can potentially help as part of that process. You take today, you're at the end, you go outside, and the impact of the wildfires in Quebec are really felt here in Washington, D.C. And if you think about who are the people that don't have the ability to work from home today, we learned a lot about essential workers during the pandemic, and those are the people who have to go out into this, into the poor air quality today.
And the people who don't have homes.
And people who don't have homes and people who are unhoused, then they're at that intersection of dealing with potentially chronic medical conditions and also dealing with poor air quality. And then when you think about the potential for extreme heat, and it's warm outside and you don't have air conditioning, how does that, so to what Greg said, those people who contribute the least are the ones who are impacted the most by climate change and the realities of what we see every day. One of the things that we think about at Google is how can we be of service? How do we make information more accessible? And we think about that in a few ways. For example, if you think about the wildfires, one of the things that we want to do is really how can we help governments and public health organizations to better manage and better be prepared for supporting communities, and particularly communities that are marginalized. So we think about crisis alerts. You heard about many of the things that the government is doing. How are we supporting countries in those crisis alerts, helping them understand and letting people know where the wildfires are, where they're going, so that they can respond and respond appropriately for that? How do we think about in managing extreme heat? How do we do that? And I'll talk a little bit about some of the efforts that we've been doing as it relates to extreme heat. But for us, our impact at that intersection of health equity and and climate is how can we help those communities who are impacted the most?
Wow.
Can I just add that?
Yeah, you can.
When you talked about the climate, is that it today with the haziness, it doesn't know boundaries. It doesn't know state lines. It doesn't know country lines. It's like a hurricane. It just doesn't see them, you know. So
it creates
affects
its own pathway. Right. So with that, Regina, you were the Surgeon General of the United States. We know that. So what do you see from a macro level or whatever level you want to talk about the most significant health risks that are posed by climate change? We touched on a few things, but if you had to pick one or two or three, what would they be?
Well, Greg did a nice job of laying some of them out. I'll stick on this particulate matter that's in the air today. You know, I'm old enough to remember when you used to have smog alerts, and with the weather forecast, you saw what the smog alerts were. It was great that we didn't have them for a while. Now we're seeing it again. The non-communicable diseases, particularly the chronic diseases. Over 50% of Americans have a chronic illness. So things like hypertension, diabetes, obesity, strokes, and heart disease are all affected by climate.
Pulmonary.
And if you look at today with the particulates, and if you got a kid with asthma or you got an elderly person, we breathe in these particulates. And I would recommend you wear your COVID mask today during this time, because you breathe it in and you can tell because it irritates your nose, you cough, and it irritates. But these particulate matters are so small, they get into your bloodstream. And our bodies are made so that they can accommodate that once or twice. But if you're exposed to it over a period of time, it has chronic changes. And even the healthy athlete out there jogging, if you're exposed to it every day, it's going to have changes down the line and consequences. And from a business standpoint, of course, you don't have a healthy workforce. You don't have, you got real problems. But the hypertension is the other thing I'd say. Well, all of those. Stress is the major cause of things that happen with disasters, with either the climates, and all of those impact high blood pressure, diabetes, strokes, heart disease. It is impacted and made worse. And I think and we can talk later about the social determinants of health, but those are the health things I think immediately that people can understand.
And is it true that sometimes these things are so insidious you don't even know? They're just sort of increasing over time, and then you suddenly feel the impact. Is that one way to think about it?
It's sort of like, you know you shouldn't be eating that ice cream, but over several years you've gotten this weight and you know it's a problem. It just sneaks up on you. But you know that you can prevent it, and prevention is my thing, so I'll get on, that's my soapbox. But you know you can prevent it, and who wants to go out and breathe bad air? And it's not just the air or the disasters. We see the same thing with snow and having an ice storm. All of these things cause stress. And when you have like a hurricane or something, you got to prepare for that storm. You got to go get the batteries and make sure you got clean water. And there's a stress level there. If you're without power for weeks, there's another stress level. All these things are continuously adding stress. So.
Yeah, they are. Ivor, tell us about how you see climate change impacting the health of your employees and the communities you serve.
Yeah, sure.
You have a big community as well.
Our community is the globe. And I think for us, there are a couple of ways that, first of all, we provide access to information. We want to make information more accessible to people. And that means making information more accessible both to individuals who are consumers, but also in partnership with other organizations so that the people who are serving as what I call the boots on the ground have the information that they need to be able to provide service to others. And then we also, we want to be a good corporate citizen, so we want to provide support there as well to communities. So one example, I'll talk a little bit about our crisis alerts. And when we think about that, I mentioned a little bit about how we talk about addressing wildfires and helping people know that. But we also think about how are we thinking about floods and flood forecasting. And we have something called the Environmental Insights Explorer that allows governments and public health organizations to gather that information, have that information available to them to help them make better decisions. And for us, our task is how are we working in partnership to help other organizations have better information to provide support and services. Similarly, with hurricanes, over 425 plus million hurricane alerts have gone out through systems for us. Those are examples of ways that we can be supportive. The other thing is around extreme heat. One of the things that we talk about a lot in climate change is extreme heat. And that intersection of extreme heat, poverty, lack of resources really impacts on health equity and non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases. We talked a little bit about how that impacts on the soil, how that impacts on the environment. One of the things that we want to do is how do we help inform to solutions for that? And one of those examples is trees. Oftentimes when we look at redlining, particularly here in the US, we look at communities and areas where there's lack of tree canopy. And our ability to say, here's an area where you're seeing, to the conversations earlier, increased degrees of heat in those communities. How can we help facilitate by helping plant trees? So for example, we worked with over 200 communities in LA to actually to plant trees to increase the tree canopy. The other thing that we have is a program called Cool Roofs. So we can use our technology and our satellite imagery to actually understand where there are hot spots in areas where there are roofs that have greater heat in community, and oftentimes this lines up with redlining and environmental choices of where we build buildings. And our task is to inform communities so they can do interventions and potentially do cool roof interventions for that. And so those are some of the ways that we think about environment, and we know the impacts, we see it, our communities see it, but how are we helping to actually address that? Because it's a systemic issue. There are things that we can do as individuals, but there's also really a systemic change that needs to be happening as well.
Can I add for technology-wise, for the individual, I see you got your Oura Ring, just the technology that we have, like the watch I have on, my heart rate's higher today, and I notice it. I get patients to tell me and keep track of these things when they're going through things, when they're going through these disasters. If they they can learn their own changes. So this technology really is at their fingertips, and they can start to help. And I'm sure there'll be other things that come out to help as well, in addition to the alerts and things.
So Ivor, I know you all are in the information business, and so talk a little bit about the technology. You know what Dr. Benjamin just said,
ring that you're in, and stuff like that. So.
One of the I do not have my my Pixel watch on right now. But I think what is really important is there are those factors that we understand, and the more we understand about our sleep, our stress level, that information for us to help us better manage those things, to help us identify when we have those chronic stressors that are impacting us, because that impacts on hypertension, that impacts on chronic diseases, that impacts on metabolic health for people. And I think understanding these stressors, and oftentimes people don't realize that they have a base level of stress. And making tools and solutions to help people understand and monitor and make better decisions about their care, and more informed, because sometimes I don't want to say better, it's more informed because they have more information. And that's really a role and an opportunity that we can play in healthcare and within health systems. How are we we can fish, we can give people fish, or we can teach people to fish. And how are we providing resources and solutions as health and healthcare happens more and more outside the four walls of healthcare? It's really important for us to be able to do that. For us, 3 out of 4 people come to the internet for information around their health, other than their family, other than their doctor. And we want to make sure that that information is authoritative and evidence-based. So that's a real important part of the work that we do, is making sure that when people come and ask about how can I learn more about my health, how can I make better decisions about nutrition, how can I make better decisions around the foods that I eat, what I do, how I take care of myself, and how I'm more informed when I speak with my doctor or my care provider about things, is how do we make sure that that information is authoritative and evidence-based as part of the way that we do that.
Well, we're kind of at the end of, go ahead, Regina.
I'm not going to let her stop us. There is something called compound disasters.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about the baseline, there's a baseline of stress. When you have these compound disasters, you don't come back to baseline. So compound
is a new baseline, actually, right?
So the compound disasters are, for example, with our area, we had Katrina and we had the hurricanes. And while you're doing your resiliency time, on top of that came the oil spill. And so you had another disaster on it. You didn't have time to recover, so you have another disaster. And each of those are compounding. Yeah. And so at the National Academy of Sciences, we're doing some stuff around the effects of compounding disasters. And all of that affects our our health. And we haven't talked a lot about, but behavioral and mental health is tremendous effects there. So that's one of the things about it. And then around health equity, I wanted to mention that particularly, I'm giving the examples of the hurricanes because that's where I live, but it could apply to anything else. When we have a storm, for example, a hurricane, it's the wealthy people who can build back. It's those who have the time, those who don't have the savings, who don't have the bank accounts to sit and wait until they get the FEMA funds or they can't rebuild. And all of a sudden you're having them to have to move or sell their properties, their beachfront properties for a little of nothing. And so what you have is the poor being displaced. You have the middle income moving inland, and all you have left is the very wealthy who live there, perhaps they're seasonal, until they have another investment. And so the whole community structure's changed. So if you're a business trying to figure out what are you going to do for your workers, all of that's changed already. And so you need to make sure that you keep your healthy workforce, that you make sure you give them access to health care, and so that the resiliency starts before the disaster, so that you give them their tetanus shots, making sure their blood pressure is under control. All those things will help us respond to any of these. And when we talk, climate, that's where it is. And one thing that just came to mind, sorry about this. After Katrina, I went to Phuket, Thailand, to look at how they had overcome the tsunamis, because their industry was seafood and basically having the same type of industry we had, and tourism. Well, we were just a few of the folks that were the American delegation to that. And one of the speakers from the podium said, in the US, you guys define your disasters by the number of dollars lost. Here, we define it by the number of lives lost. So if there's anything I would say to businesses is that invest in your people, invest in the people and their infrastructures and the things to keep your people healthy, and it'll help your bottom line.
I'm going to.
And you're going to get the last word. We are out of time, but I want to give you the last word.
Thank you. I think it's really important. I grew up in the tornado belt. And so I grew up, and so we often think about the coast, but thinking about Middle America and the tornado belt. And it is really important because it is the people whose houses are not as secure, who lose their homes and don't have the resources to build back, who are displaced from their communities, and then their property value. And you have to remember, it's not just that, it's the generational wealth, it's the generational land that they have now lost because they can't build back. And so climate not only impacts communities, not only impacts health, but also impacts economic opportunity for those who are more likely to be displaced by these natural disasters. So I think it's really important for us to think about investing in people, investing in their resources, and investing in economic opportunity and for our communities.
What a fascinating discussion. Let's thank our two panelists. Awesome. Thank you. We are out of time. I want to thank you, Dr. Benjamin, and you, Dr. Horn. Thank you both for a fascinating discussion. This could have continued, in my view, for another hour, but they would probably get the hook. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you, Wade.
That was a phenomenal conversation, and so glad to have been able to witness that. So a sincere thank you to Dr. Benjamin, Dr. Horn, and Ruth for their enlightening contributions. So to carry forward, I am thrilled to introduce our next speaker, who will introduce a phenomenal panel as well. So with us, we will have Ria Goswami. Ria is an inspiring Gen Z environmental justice activist. She is also a student at Cornell University and the founder and executive director of the Environmental Justice Coalition. Thank you. What's up?
everyone. Thank you so much for making the time to come out today, and I'd like to extend the welcome that was extended by many of the previous moderators and speakers before. Today we have a quite diverse discussion and panel, and I'd like to invite them all to come up here and introduce themselves. Today we're going to be talking to physicians, business leaders, and many more. So please everyone come up. Thank you. So I was already given a very warm introduction by Seema, but I'm Ria, the moderator for this panel, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Adhoot.
Well, thank you. My name is Dr. Samantha Adhoot. I'm a pediatrician in Alexandria, Virginia, and I'm proud to represent the American Academy of Pediatrics today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adrienne Hollis. I'm an environmental toxicologist and attorney. I'm also the Vice President for Environmental Justice, Health, and Community Resilience at the National Wildlife Federation.
Hi, my name is Vi Nguyen. I'm a pediatrician at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego. I'm the head of the green team there, and I'm a frontline pediatrician who takes care of about 2,000 kids, and just an example of a physician in the front lines.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise Naguib, and I lead global sustainability and supplier diversity for Marriott International, the hotel company based out of Bethesda, Maryland. And we have about 8,500 hotels around the world, and my team leads the strategy and program for all of our hotels.
Morning, everyone. Kevin Rabinovich. I'm the Global Vice President of Sustainability and Chief Climate Officer at Mars. So I lead a team called the Healthy Planet Team. And we are the corporate environmental lead for Mars, which, for those that don't know, a very large privately owned food manufacturing business with operations all over the world.
Yeah, so from the previous panel, we heard a lot of inspiring things from Dr. Horn and Dr. Benjamin. So to kind of go on that line of healthcare providers, how do you all, from a community perspective, a physician perspective, and a business perspective, think that healthcare providers can focus more on public health, engage with communities, and engage with other sectors to address a lot of the intersectional issues of climate and public health?
That was long.
Well, I'm very happy to start with that. As a pediatrician, you know, we have a very privileged perspective with our patients in our clinics, in our emergency departments and hospitals, where we see children and families who are affected by our changing climate. And for me as a pediatrician, it's really the faces of these children, which are the faces of climate change. It's, for me, I have seen in my office a 15-year-old boy who developed kidney damage and muscle breakdown after a football practice in record August heat. A 2-year-old who came to my office with a rash after going to Maine, and it turned out she had Lyme disease. There wasn't any Lyme disease in Maine when I was a child. Or a 12-year-old boy who was evacuated in the middle of the night from a Category 5 hurricane who came to me for his recurring nightmares. These are kids I've all seen in my one office, and I think we have an opportunity and an obligation to share this information about how the changing climate is affecting people's health today with the broader community and with other sectors.
I think I can say that I've seen an increase, a big increase, in physicians and health practitioners generally focused on climate change issues. I remember, you know, I've been working in EJ for more than 20 years, and if I can quickly remember, a resident in Pensacola. I too am from Mobile, as Dr. Benjamin talked about, and he showed up at a meeting with a bag of medications, and he said, my doctor doesn't know what's causing my illnesses, but is treating all of the symptoms because it's important. And we were, you know, at that time, we didn't have enough, I think there weren't enough physicians who were knowledgeable about the effects, the inequitable effects of environmental pollution. And I think with climate change, the medical consortium Association of Nurses for Health Equity, and other groups, we're seeing that, we're seeing the realization of the importance of health professionals in protecting communities and addressing health concerns.
I just want to say I'm so proud to be a Kaiser doctor right now. I'm one of like thousands of climate and health advocates across the country, and we really are connected, especially pediatricians. And I'm so proud to be part of Kaiser. And what I realize is that as a pediatrician, I had to speak up for kids. And one of the aha moments is one of my mentors, Bruce Bakar, who is a former Kaiser doctor who published that groundbreaking JAMA study that linked climate change heat waves with premature birth. Is I have actually an ex-preemie. My VV is 15, she's super smart, she was a 28-weeker. And the thought that heat waves and climate change drive premature births, like that's a pediatrician's issue. And so that's what motivates me. And I think pediatricians and frontline doctors, we're part of the solution. And so I'm proud to be here just as a frontline person, hopefully part of the solution.
Mm-hmm. I think from a business perspective, I mean, for us, our company started 97 years ago, and we hired a physician before there was healthcare. And so one of our very important core values is to take care of our associates. And with 750,000 associates around the world, we find the connection to ensuring that they are well taken care of and understand the work that we're doing is in benefit, not just to the top line, but to them as individuals within our company that are so important. And one of the most important assets of our company is how we are trying to make that connection. This isn't just a nice to have because of what's happening, but it's also really for the benefit of the communities that they are part of and the benefit that we want to really be part of the solution around where we operate.
Yeah, as the other half of the non-MD PhD couch. So our business is not healthcare, right? Our business is food products that delight people and their pets. So Mars is also a very large pet food manufacturer. We do actually also have a very large veterinary care business. So doctors for pets, and so. Echoing Denise's comments, I mean, we care very much about the wealth and or the health, and well-being of our associates and also everyone's pets through our vet clinics. But I think one of the areas that we're thinking the most about this is actually in our extended value chain. So you heard, I think it was Candace talking about sort of extended supply chains. So a lot of the agricultural commodities that are used are grown by smallholders and folks at very low levels of income. And threats of climate change on those communities are even more severe than, as people have pointed out, we're facing here today with wildfires and air quality. And so we think the ongoing viability of those supply chains and those agricultural systems, not just as a supply to our business, but also to the health and well-being of those people is really critical to the future of both their lives and our business. So that's something we spend some time thinking about.
Yeah, so echoing a lot of what Denise and Kevin said about protecting workers as well as vulnerable communities, how do you think businesses can interact more with a lot of the workers in a lot of these vulnerable communities and community-based organizations that represent these people as well?
I think there's a real opportunity. I think this is just starting as a conversation to understand the role that business has to play in not just their own associates, but then obviously in the communities where they work, where they operate. For us, one of the connection points we have is the investment in natural capital and the value. We heard it before about trees. That's an area that we invest a lot and allow our associates to be part of the solution by genuinely planting trees in the communities where they are operating and making the connection between the health of the community through tree planting, especially one of our biggest partners is Arbor Day Foundation, and their goal is to plant trees in places of most need. And that is very fun, looking at all the data and understanding where those places are. And we are in thousands of communities around the world. So the idea is to really connect our associates and these opportunities to be parts of the solution so that they're bettering their own communities, but making the connection between trees, not just a tree. A tree has a lot of great benefits, including clean water, including clean air, including the reduction of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And then having it be part of their own community, I think is a way where we're really trying to show those connection points directly to our own associates.
Yeah, I'd maybe build on that by saying I think there's a there's a symptom disease perspective here that's helpful. So the disease is climate change, right? So that's the thing that's causing all of the problems and the symptoms that are being experienced by these communities. And so on the disease front, what we individually and then collectively in other groups, so for example, with Kaiser Permanente, we're part of a group called the Renewable Thermal Collaborative that's trying to figure out how to decarbonize thermal energy. So a lot of people talk about electricity, but there's a whole other sector of the energy space that needs to be dealt with. And so to the extent that we can help prevent, well, usually people say prevent the worst consequences of climate change, but I guess maybe I should say prevent climate change from getting worse, because it's already bad. To the extent that we can tackle that by reducing emissions and sequestering carbon, that helps resolve the underlying disease that's leading to all of these problems. However, it's already here, we're already suffering, so the symptoms are already there, and we know curing that disease is going to take a little while. So simultaneously, we need to be managing the symptoms, and that again brings us back to, I think, there are communities that are experiencing and feeling the worst of this, and so I think that's where there's a nice synergy and overlap between the thing that as a business we would be worried about the resilience of our supply chains and the things that help with the local communities, which is resilience. And so I think, we do a lot of work on the intersection of that, of how do we make crops, more drought resistant, more heat resistant, so that farmers can maintain their incomes, which then means they still have the resources to engage in healthcare. How do we help local governments build up infrastructure? So I think that's really sort of the way we think about it.
Yeah, I think businesses have a unique opportunity and a responsibility to support the communities in which they sit. A great example, opportunity zones, and looking at your own carbon footprint, but what are you doing for the community? Like, why not solar farms as an example, of reducing just some of the effects of climate change? In addition, I think during Katrina, we didn't pay attention, but we learned about the importance of our essential workers or frontline workers, and then we turned around with COVID, and the same thing happened, right? Those who were most exposed were least protected. And so I think there are learning opportunities there, and then there are opportunities to think outside the box and grow together in partnership with the communities in which you sit.
Yeah, so we've heard quite a bit about identifying a lot of the problem, which is that we need to protect vulnerable communities, vulnerable populations. Those are who are disproportionately socioeconomically impacted, children, mothers. So shifting a little bit away from identifying the problem, what are some specific strategies, initiatives that you have either employed in the past or hope to be employed that might help protect these vulnerable communities and solve some of the problems that we've mentioned?
I guess I'll go first. Okay. In order for anything we do to be successful, we work in partnership with communities, and communities, of course, speak for themselves. One of the things that I know the National Wildlife Federation is doing right now, other than, most importantly, of course, incorporating environmental justice across the organization, is we were one of the recipients of the Environmental Protection Agency's Technical Assistance Grant. And that is along with partners, and our partners include universities and community groups. And together we crafted a research plan to address their concerns, a plan to address the lack of information, the lack of skills, or the lack of support, even if it's especially financial support that these communities have. And I think the first step for all of us is just that. That's what I've been doing for years, and that's what the people I work with, and I see a bunch of my colleagues and friends here, that's what that's the first rule, right, is to work in partnership with those who are affected.
Mm-hmm. I'm really excited to, I'm so proud of San Diego, so anyone's traveling in San Diego, let me know. I'm happy to have coffee with you. So I used to be assistant chief of peds, and my husband's assistant chief of radiology, so I call ourselves the middle management couple in San Diego. And so, like, when we talk about access, we talk about quality, we talk about things that happen in San Diego, it's our problem, right? Like my husband runs the radiology department, I used to run peds. And then, so what I'm really excited about in San Diego, we've gotten so much support from Kaiser nationally and then San Diego, is we're putting on a Heat and Human Health Summit at UCSD. And so we've brought together all the major healthcare organizations, plus the tribal nations, plus county to talk about heat waves. So I always tell people, I don't know what the answer is, I just know the answer includes you. At UCSD on August 12th. And yeah, we're just making moves locally, dropping op-eds. So that's the thing. I think all of us have the answer. And I think when you lead with joy, positivity, if you've gotten over your climate grief, there's lots of joy to be had in climate work. So that's why I try to talk about climate work, joy, and kind of this antidote for physician burnout is really like putting the earth and kids at the center.
I'd like to add the real opportunity and obligation of the health sector to lead in climate solutions. And Kaiser has been a real national leader in that regard. And, you know, we have a tremendous opportunity to leverage our purchasing and lobbying power to accelerate the transition to a clean energy economy. I mean, we're 1/6 of the national economy, right? We generate about 8%, 8.5% of national emissions. So it wouldn't just, our engagement is really critical. And I think it's important to recognize that only about 7% of our emissions are actually coming from our facilities on site. You know, about 11% in the US are from electricity generation, and 80% are coming from our purchasing and the development and transport and disposal of our goods and services. So the decarbonization of the health sector has broad implications for the societal, you know, society at large and for the national economy. So we have a lot of leveraging and purchasing power.
Yeah, so I just want to mention, I want to echo what Dr. Nguyen just said about climate joy. As a child who grew up while climate change was just becoming worse and worse, and seeing a lot of my friends suffer from health effects, including my own sibling, and you just see a lot of hopelessness and despair, which is what pushes a lot of youth activists to pursue youth activism as an answer to all these questions and hope to push corporations, physicians, and community-based organizations and partner with all of them to help reach a solution and to hope that we're a part of the movement. But I do want to say climate joy is a very important part of not burning out in general while looking at climate change and not finding despair, and seeing and talking with so many different stakeholders and people and seeing that there are people who are passionate about the work that they're doing and trying to make a difference. So we all come from a lot of different perspectives, and I do want to say as like kind of like a closing question and a final conversation is how can we all better work together? As Adrian very wisely mentioned, a lot of the first step that we take is partnerships and partnering with other people. So how can we partner with people from different perspectives, whether it be youth activists, physicians, communities, to better focus on the lens of how climate change is worsening public health?
I'll start again. Well, the key, and this is where my work is the interconnectedness between everything. You know, we've coined a phrase, and apologies to the physicians in the room, the syndemic, where we talk about a number of different challenges that lead to adverse health effect and that exacerbate each other, right? And that begins with systemic racism, environmental injustice, and in this case, climate change, and we could go on. It's usually two or more, but we can sit here and list a lot. But the thing is that we think about all of that and who needs to be at the table, who are the stakeholders. And it's non-traditional stakeholders. It's not the people that we automatically think about. Yes, it's businesses in the community. It's, it's people who employ people in the neighborhood. It's people who could employ people in the neighborhood, right? Because economic justice is one of the issues too, that it's all interrelated. So I think that the key in my perspective is to look around the table and see who's not there. And then that's when you start reaching out to non-traditional partners, because everybody has, as I know I always say this, has a role to play, and there's no small role, so.
If you think about and look at the Sustainable Development Goals, number 17 is all about partnerships. So I think you're absolutely right on that. That is the one piece that pulls all of these challenges together, is really engaging a variety of partners in the solutioning. We try to do that today, but I will say I don't think we've done anything, for example, of pulling in the health piece of it in a more effective manner. And so that's an opportunity for us, right? How do we think about that? What are ways that we can bring in the right partners and discussions to be able to inform our view and be able to figure out, are there solutions that we can work on together? What are these connection points that we can work on? So I think it's opening the door and getting, our own house in order, understanding what is missing, like you said, what stakeholders are not at the table. And then I would say, I think for us, with associates all over the world, it's also engaging them in a better way. Our starting point is really about getting them climate fluency and climate education in a way that's understandable for them. And so we're working through that now and really getting ready to deploy a lot of education for our associates. Even, 85% of our associates are hourly associates. They're not sitting in front of a computer. So how do we give them the right kind of information to understand why it matters to them, and so that they can be interested and engaged in the dialogue and be part of our holistic solution around these areas?
I go around the country talking about like physician wellness and burnout and climate work. And so my message to everyone here is what I usually tell the medical students and the residents and the other physicians I talk to, is that you are enough. And so all of us are part of the solution, and everyone has imposter syndrome. But when you kind of know yourself so well, whether or not you get there through writing, through blogging, I'm an Instagram, social media person. When you know yourself so well, you are part of the solution, and whatever your identity is, whether or not be your ethnic identity, where you're from, where you went to high school, you'll find joy, because what I've realized is just by being me and being a little irreverent and a little bit weird, I'm a plogger, so we jog and pick up trash, and we're like a very niche community on Instagram, but it's funny, people tend to trust us, and then I've actually met so many different people, and it gives me, I'm not fearful. Like, I reach out to Adrienne. I've never met her before. I was like, oh, let's have coffee. And when you reach out for the earth and you reach out for kids, I very rarely had anyone say no. Because when you have the good of the community at heart, people tend to respond with an open heart. So you are enough would be my message, whoever you are.
I just have to say, I thought I was the only person who jogged and picked up.
Oh,
trash.
yeah, you want to?
Now I know where to go. I just want to recognize the importance of trainees and the value of working with trainees, particularly healthcare trainees, particularly with regard to integration of climate into medical education, and how critical that's really been across the country. Medical students and other pharmacy, nursing students have been working within their institutions to integrate climate change education. Just here at GW and George Washington University's medical schools both now have climate change curriculum, in large part due to the medical students at UVA, where I'm a professor. So it's that's been a really important collaboration, and we're all learning together, frankly, so it's really important to do that.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, one of the opportunities here is to reach out and learn from others who have similar motivations but completely different backgrounds, right? So most of the time when I go out, and I suspect this is true for my colleagues up here, and you're at an event, you're with people that do the same sort of stuff you do, right? So normally I'm talking to other food companies or other consumer products companies, maybe if it gets really edgy, there's an automaker in there or something, right? So, and I think there's a real value in spending part of your time and energy engaging or talking with completely different groups. And so, ironically, the last time Denise and I shared a stage was speaking to the Association of Accounting Professors. So people that teach accounting at universities, because they were interested in what role can accountancy play in contributing to sustainability, and how do they help use it to draw students into the profession and the profession make a contribution. And so, so that's sort of another example of similar to being here today, of coming and talking to a different group and hearing different ideas and different thoughts, which one is a way to, I think, contribute to the community, and also to be sort of provoked and inspired, right? And so, so I think, yeah, there's a lot of why should we care about this, and we've heard a lot about that. But I think it's important to then pivot to and what do we do, right? And so I love the comments about Kaiser's full value chain and needing to sort of solve for that 80%, because that's true for every business.
Yeah.
Right? It's true for hotels, it's true for food manufacturing businesses, and so that's a shared problem with slightly different flavors. But so things like that where you hear and go, oh, okay, how can we connect? How does that overlap? And so I think that collaborative, transdisciplinary, I guess, way of thinking about things is really going to be critical to helping drive some of these solutions. Because at the end of the day, this isn't an individual country, person, company, community problem. It's a shared collective problem that we're trying to solve for.
Yeah, does anyone have any final words they want to get in before I close?
I do, actually.
Okay, go ahead.
Surprise, right? I think it's important that we look back on where we were, where we started, and where we are now. When I was, and I'm like Dr. Benjamin, we like to tell stories. When I was little, I remember my mom, who was a teacher, used to hold my brother over the bathtub and let the hot water run when he had asthma attacks because she couldn't afford medication, right? And I know that other people in my neighborhood, in my community, did that. Fast forward 10 years ago, a 9-year-old girl, Ella, in London died from an asthma attack. 7 years later, her mom was able to have air pollution listed as a cause of death on her death certificate. So we've made some major changes. And I know that she was the first in the UK. I think she was the first worldwide, but don't quote me on that. But the importance is, look at where we were, and then look at how important it is now. And I thought about that this morning when I walked outside, and I thought it was a forest fire. I'm like, wait, we don't have any trees, near my house. That's how bad it was. And, I just thought about where we were and where we are now. And of course, with that, where we need to go, right?
Yeah, and on the note of where we need to go, as Seema mentioned, I'm a student in college. And a lot of what Denise and Kevin also mentioned, how important education is. Dr. Ed Hoot also mentioned that. And education is the power for the future. It's how we power the future of our workforce, future physicians, future community leaders. And I think it's important for colleges and universities to take notes from what medical universities have done and integrate a lot more climate change into their curriculum. It's mainly for students who are just interested in it. But yet, as we've seen today, is climate change is an issue that affects everyone, affects no matter what business you're in, or what major you may be, or what interests you have. Climate change is such an interdisciplinary problem now, and something that everyone deserves and needs to be educated on to make correct and just choices for how they affect the community. So that's why I think that, yes, we should also push for education for climate and health, and push for that for the future of our workforce and the future of people who may also be physicians, business leaders, and thought leaders today, for them to make good choices. But yeah, thank you so much. This was a wonderful panel.
Thank you.
And it was lovely to meet you in person. Thank you.
This was wonderful. All right. So I have the wonderful task of thanking everybody for coming here. My name is Bishara Shukair, and I serve as the Chief Health Officer at Kaiser Permanente. And on behalf of all of us at Kaiser Permanente and our friends and colleagues at the World Economic Forum, we want to thank everybody who's been with us here in the room and the thousands of the folks online who've been tracking this conversation. And I think a couple of the themes that we've heard today around the interconnectedness between climate change and health was so critical for all of us to be aware of. And I think obviously for this room, there's no doubt about that connectedness here. I think there are multiple pathways that we've heard about how climate change and health are interconnected. The first pathway is on individual health. Clearly, when you have extreme weather, when you have floods, when you have fires, when you have extreme heat, that impacts your health, your physical health, and your mental health. So that's that first level that we've heard from panelists about. The second pathways is around the impact on the ecosystem and community health. When it's too hot to grow food, when the conditions become conducive for infectious disease to spread, like Zika and malaria, and dengue fever and others, all of that have direct impact on health. And the third pathway is truly societal. When you do have the food scarcity, the floods, the fires, and that could lead to migrations, could lead to conflict, which we know have a direct impact on health, physical and mental health. So the interconnectedness is there at multiple pathways, and we had a chance to hear from wonderful speakers and panelists about that. The common theme, another common theme that we've heard all along, is about the direct connectedness between climate change and health equity. I think it becomes clear that climate change is not impacting health equitably. And I think just like Dr. Ivor mentioned, Horn, those who contribute the least are getting impacted the most. So we have heard all of that. There are QR codes on your tables for folks here in the room. I think they're going to flash online as well for additional resources. I think the other thing I'd want to say, we're so excited about this series with the World Economic Forum. There are going to be multiple of these convening, and it's really important that we take action. I'm incredibly proud of Kaiser Permanente becoming the first and the largest health system to be carbon neutral back in 2020. I'm incredibly proud of our commitment to further reduce our carbon footprint by 50%, including scope 3 by 2030, and our commitment to become carbon neutral by 2050. But we can't do that alone. We continue to work with the National Academies of Medicine on other health systems and how other health systems can play a role in that trajectory. So we're really excited about that work, and we're incredibly proud about the effort that we've announced this morning with the Business for Social Responsibility, BSR, on bringing businesses together to make sure that those businesses keep health at the center of their climate action work. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. I'm incredibly hopeful, incredibly excited about today, and this is the first of many. So for folks in the room, we have some lunch and reception in the back of the room here at the Center for Total Health at Kaiser Permanente. And for the folks online, thank you for joining us. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.